Welcome back everyone to another video. Now this is the second time I'm recording this video after a 45-minute footage just going to waste because it got corrupted because SD cards are formatted at FAT32 still for some reason and I don't know why. So enough with the rant, let's go ahead. It's the end of 2017, everyone's doing some sort of a special video. I thought I might do one as well, and I have a plethora of single board computers. Like you all know, I've never done a single video that goes through all of them, so this is a rundown for what I have up till 2017, 31st of December 2017, and of course going into 2018 now. Now you will see a lot of 96 boards single board computer here in this video. Now I don't know if you know, but I haven't really officially announced it on my channel, but I do work for Linaro as an application engineer in 96 boards, and I do have a lot of their hardware. Now we also have a 96 boards YouTube channel where I do some of my projects, and you can see my videos there as well. I'll link the channel in the description. And on the 96 boards YouTube channel we also have weekly live streams called open hours, so you can go ahead and take a look at them as well. So I'll leave everything in down in the description, so you guys can go ahead and take a look and also see some of my other projects that I haven't really done on this particular channel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the development boards, at all of the development boards that I own. This is going to be a long video. The last one that got corrupted was like 40 minutes. So let's go ahead and let's start it with some microcontrollers. Now the first one is the Arduino Mega 2560. Now this is the first Arduino board that I had. Now of course at that time everyone goes ahead and buy Uno as their first board, but I chose this one because this has a bunch of IO pins and you can't really run out of them. Around 53 GPIOs and a few analog IO pins. So this is a pretty neat little board. You wouldn't have seen much of this board on the channel because I only use it for prototyping. I then use this board and then move over to Arduino Uno and then do the project based on Uno rather than using the Mega for the project. The Mega takes up a lot of space, but it's really nice for prototyping. Talking about taking up a lot of space, the next board doesn't really do that. So this is the Arduino Nano 3. Again, a neat little board. Uses the Arduino IDE and runs like an Arduino. Really tiny board and saves up a lot of space if you are doing a project that is constrained by it. Moving on to something a bit more powerful, and the first 96 boards board. This is the 96 boards Carbon by Seed Studio. Now this uses a Cortex M4 based STM32 and follows the IoT specs of the 96 boards. And it's a neat little board to run real-time operating systems like Zephyr. That's what I usually use. A lot of people also run Mbed OS and other things, but Zephyr is primarily why I use this board. Alright, so with the microcontrollers out of the way, or MCUs, let's go ahead to the more proper ARM Cortex A based devices. So the first one is the Raspberry Pi. Now the Raspberry Pi, this is the Raspberry Pi 3, but Raspberry Pi in general will always be fairly close to my heart, and for the reason that it was basically the first board that I ever had, and this board is the reason why I am here doing this particular video and really got me into programming and all of that stuff. So the Raspberry Pi, original Raspberry Pi, really liked it. Also like the Raspberry Pi 2, which is inside this closed case. I didn't really open it up. This is the Raspberry Pi 2, but I never really liked the Raspberry Pi 3 too much because it just seemed to be a bit unnecessary to have a 64-bit sock just to run a 32-bit OS and with the limitation of a gig of RAM. For the same reason, the Raspberry Pi 2 could have been made a bit more powerful. Had the Raspberry Pi 2 been a 1.2 gigahertz SoC instead of 900 megahertz, the Raspberry Pi 3 is seriously seems like a unnecessary waste of resource if you ask me. So not really my favorite Raspberry Pi board, but still a neat little board. All right, so moving on to some x86 boards. Let's get to the first x86 boards that I own. This is the Jaguar board. This was again a no brand kind of a thing, generic Chinese, but this was one of the first x86 boards that really hit the market, and people started buying this. Before this, it was mostly Nux or some One Hunglo x86 boards that don't really perform all that well. So this is running the dreaded Intel Atom Z3735 with a gig of RAM. Again, the SoC isn't really that well received by the community. Even Linux has a bit of issue running on it. You can't even run Windows properly, it's just too slow, especially when it's limited by that single gig of RAM. Apart from that, it's still a fairly good board. Megabit Ethernet, USB 2, three of them, HDMI, SD card, a separate mic and a headphone jack, and that's about it. It did had an all board SPI flash to store the BIOS and all, so that was a neat little trick, but I really didn't mess around with that. No one actually did. There was no a BIOS update or anything like that released. Next up, following the x86 lineup, is the upboard. The upboard is a good x86 board, that's what I'd say. It's tiny compared to other x86. Even the successor to the upboard, the up squared, is a fairly bit larger than this. It's the exact same form factor of the Raspberry Pi, but they did manage to fit an Intel Atom, a fairly powerful Intel Atom system SoC underneath this, along with a good amount of heat sinks and heat shielding all over the board. So it has an Intel Atom X5 Z85 or 8300 or 8500, something along those lines. Quad core 1.4 gigahertz and 1.9 gigahertz boost. Gigabit Ethernet, USB 2 and USB 3 via OTG, and then a bunch of other peripherals. Follows the Raspberry Pi 3 pinout, has a decent height on them, and that's about it. It's a nice little Intel board. I'd still recommend it if you ever want to go into x86 for your SBC, which really seems redundant right now since Intel has almost cancelled all of their IoT plans. So alright, so moving on, go ahead with the 96 boards lineup. So first of all, I'll do this in order of which board I got first. So first of all, we have the HiKey 960. This is the successor of the original HiKey, which we'll get to in a moment. Now this little board is still the most powerful board I have. It's quad core, octa core with a big little quad core clusters. So quad Cortex A72s or A73, I'm not very sure on that one, but and then quad smaller Cortex A53 cores, along with 3 gigabytes of RAM. That's still most the amount of RAM I have on an ARM system. It's only beaten up by the upboard that has 4 gigs of RAM. Again, with the 3 gigs of RAM, it has 32 gigabytes of UFS flash. Still a lot of storage, very fast storage for a board like this. And then again, the upboard is the only one that comes anywhere close to the specs of this board. It has a PCI slot down below. It's in the M.2 form factor. Apart from that, the usual Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity, and you can see the UART mezzanine. So again, it follows the 96 board's consumer edition form factor. Again, I have done a video with running full-blown VR stuff on this board on the 96 boards channel, so you can go ahead and check that out. Coming to the second board I got was the MediaTek X20. Now the first board, HiKey, was given to me by Lemaker because it's their board, they manufactured it. The MediaTek X20 was given to me by Seed Studio, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that. It's a Deca core SoC. So it has 10 cores. It has 2 burst cores, which are Cortex A72s, and then 4 Cortex A53s running at 1.8 gigahertz, and 4 low power Cortex A53s running at 1.4 gigahertz. So it can really differentiate between the amount of power it wants to sip or chug depending upon the workload. Again, a really nice tri cluster kind of a deal going on with this particular sock. It has 2 gigs of RAM and I think 16 or 8 gigabyte of eMMC. I'm not really sure on that. And then follows the rest of the 96 board's spec. Again, a pretty neat little board. So this is a rundown. I'm not going very deep into individual reviews of each board. Alright, so now let's talk about Dragon Board. This one's made by Arrow. It was again given to me by Seed Studio, who was selling it at that time. It has a Snapdragon 410 CPU. It's the Dragon Board 410C, but the CPU or the SoC itself is called the 410E because E stands for extended support, because Qualcomm has decided to provide 5 years, 5 or 10 years, I'm not pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. I think it's 5 years of support for the Linux kernel on this particular board. So yeah, it will last you a fairly long time, and you would get like support and updates and all of that stuff for this board continuously. So yeah, quad core, 1.2 gigahertz, single gig of RAM, 8 gigabytes of eMMC, GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi inbuilt. So up till now, the 96 boards I've shown you is before, except for the Carbon, all the three boards that I've shown you, the HiKey 960, the MediaTek, and the Dragon board are before my joining Lenovo and the 96 boards team. These were given to me to review by sellers or manufacturers. Alright, for the next bit, we are going to look at 96 boards devices that I got after I joined 96 boards. So not many of them because I already had the majority of the boards to play around with. So this one is the original HiKey. Now you would have seen this particular board in the video I did about the new Android Car UI. And I use this board because both the HiKey boards are up there in the Android source code. So if a new feature is pushed out, you can go ahead and test it and take a look on this particular board. Very neat little board. A prior version to this was done by CircuitCo, but this one's by HiKey Lemmaker. And it has 2 gigs of RAM, 8 gigabytes of eMMC, octa-core SoC. That's actually pretty powerful if you combine the compute power of all the 8 cores. So kernel builds are freakingly fast on this little board. And the black PCB, I kind of like the black PCB. I understand why people don't like it, since you can't really see the traces that well when you compare it to a green PCB. But I don't think it looks that bad. It actually looks better than a green PCB, but just not aesthetic, I guess. So yeah, again, neat little board. Alright, moving on. We have done the original HiKey, now Orange Pi. Now I have not really been a big follower of the Orange Pi development boards, but I got this one because this is a 96 boards IoT spec uh, dev board. And now even though it is IoT spec, it's not a microcontroller. It actually uses a full-blown ARM SoC. This is a one from RDE. I think it's a ARM Cortex A5 low power and uh, low power and small form factor kind of thing. There is a whole lot built into the SoC itself, including its own NAND flash, RAM, and everything. It's not a POP kind of a thing where the RAM goes physically over the SoC, but it's actually inside the same kind of a bundled uh, BGA package, not a separate BGA package for the RAM. So 256 megs of RAM, if I'm correct. Don't quote me on that again. I don't have the spec sheets in front of me. I'm just eyeballing this video. Um, USB Type A port, 2.0 SD card slot, camera, UART, micro USB, 96 baud spin out, crap, dropped it, and Wi-Fi antenna. There we go. That's about it. Neat little tiny board. Let's keep that in there and move on to the final 96 boards I have to show for this video, and that is a very giant one. You saw the smallest 96 boards, now you can see the largest one yet. Well, not actually the largest board yet, because technically uh, the Socionex Synquisser is actually like a full-blown desktop PC motherboard, so that's fairly bigger than this, but still a bigger single board computer. That's also single board. Biggest single board computer with an onboard HDMI. Let's just put it that way. From 96 boards. So this is running a quad core high silicon chipset with 2 gigs of onboard RAM, 8 gigabytes eMMC, USB 2, IR, full PCIe. Now this is not actually full, it's actually X4, but the slot itself is a full size slot, so you can easily put cards on there. A gigabit Ethernet, SD card, USB 3 on the front, optical audio out, analog audio out, HDMI power switch, and your power jack. Your Wi-Fi board is separate module. There are some more ports here and here that are actually for some accessories specific to this board, and then you have the general 96 boards low speed connector, and this is the inbuilt UART out. So I really find this very useful. You don't have to put separate UART mezzanines on this one. So yeah, pretty nice little board. Hopefully I can do a project with this in this month. I have something planned, but it would have to be further discussed and thought upon. Let's keep this inside while I talk so you guys can't hear me over the voice of the plastic. Alright, so this is an FPGA board. This is the um, Terasix DE10 Nano. It runs an Altera Cyclone FPGA, Cyclone 5 FPGA. It has dual Cortex A9 Cortex A9 cores, and then the FPGA. So it's not a pure FPGA chipset. You can actually use it as SBC and then run Linux on it with the FPGA, of course. Power, HDMI. I think this is the JTAG USB Blaster 2, OTG, and then UART, gigabit Ethernet, 1 gig of RAM, no onboard storage, only SD card. But it's a really great FPGA development board. I haven't really messed around with it a lot, but hopefully next year would be some content based around FPGAs. So this is a neat little board. They also include foot grips so it doesn't slide off. So we have the Rock 64. Now this is from the same people who made Pine 64. You can see the logo right there. From Pine 64. I guess they realized Allwinner 64 wasn't a great chipset and didn't really work out for them like it did for no one else. The Allwinner A64 is a terrible chipset for um, SBCs because the Linux support is just not there at all. But the Rock chip on here is fairly well supported. You can boot mainline their own operating systems, which is actually a third-party OS. Third-party effort. The Pine 64 people aren't directly involved in it, but that operating system also sees fairly regular kernel upgrades, so that is nice. It's a fairly well supported board. It has an onboard eMMC, if you can see here. Now, the good part on this is that the eMMC is removable and you can upgrade it easily. It just comes out like a module. I'm not going to do it right now. Has an SD card slot. You can boot it from there. Onboard SPI flash storage. You can boot it from there. I think so. And then you have a bunch of GPIOs. Ethernet. I don't know if it's gigabyte. I think it's gigabyte. uh, gigabit, sorry, and then USB 3, USB 2, analog audio, power, barrel power, nice. um, and that's about it. It's one of the boards I can recommend to people apart from the 96 boards and Raspberry Pis. This is just one of the boards that I sometimes end up recommending if the price and the functionality do match up. Alright, so the next board is going to be this one. I am forgetting the name for some reason. I have no idea why. I think it's it. Alright, I got the name. It's the Nano PC T2 Ultra. It's a iffy board. It has some issues. It heats up a lot. This is the innards of it. You can see it has a big heat sink. It's a huge heat sink. This is what I use on the Raspberry Pi. This and same heatsink on the ROG 64. The Hikey has a tinier heatsink, but this thing has an absolute monstrous heatsink because the SoC is, I think, a quad core Cortex A9, and it gets really hot. And Cortex A9 is known to get extremely hot. It has 1 gig of RAM, so it's limited by that. I think it's 16 or 8 gigabytes eMMC. Don't quote me on that. LVDS display out, so that's something more generic instead of a custom display output. USB 2, 100 Mbps, 100 megabit Ethernet, HDMI, audio jack, and power jack, barrel power. Nice. It has a big fat switch, which I also like because you can physically disconnect it from the mains power supply and can then power it back on. Just makes it easier to plug and unplug and replug. You can just, instead of doing that, switch it off and switch it on. So again, it does suffer from software support, so not really a recommended one. Also, it has a full size SD card slot, which is like I've not seen one of those in ages. Alright, moving on to two very unique little boards, because neither of them in a strict definition of an SBC are an SBC, they're not. So the first one is actually a tablet that has been converted to an SBC. So I think I did a 3-part video on this, on how to convert your tablet into an SBC, an old tablet. Now the issue with this tablet was the screen was all gone, broken, black out, and the power, most of the tablets, it's either the battery or the screen that dies, and then it becomes complete crap. But you can actually take it apart, and if you are lucky enough that it's a tablet with an HDMI port, then you can probably use it as a regular single board computer. Now of course this one has a micro or a mini HDMI port right there, and then power, and then USB for OTG, so you can attach your keyboard and mouse, and then your power input to recharge your batteries. You can see the heat sink, because again this is a Cortex A9 socket, gets fairly hot, uh, and surprisingly the heat paste that you see is, it's not actually an heat paste, it's a toothpaste. So I ran out of heat paste, so I used toothpaste and it works just fine. And 1 or 2 gigs of RAM. I'm not really sure on the memory spec for this. Now the worst part about the whole tablet was that it ran on a NAND flash, and it was terribly slow, painfully slow, and then I actually stopped using it because it wouldn't really get the job done. It was just too slow. Now, interestingly enough, if you look over here, this is a Wi-Fi module that people usually use with projects on Arduino, but they have just used the same module instead of including it in on the main PCB, and then move the wire up top. It's not even a coaxial wire, just a straight up single wire. Moved it up top to a thin piece of flex PCB, a very janky solution, but as long as it works, I guess. But the best part was that the PCB had open paths for UART, and this UART actually worked. So, and it was in the OS, coded in the OS and the kernel command line, so you can see the whole boot process, the kernel boot processes, everything on a console screen. So that was a really good plus point of converting this particular tablet on in an SBC. So this, I think, is the Lava X Tab Pro plus something like that. This weird little name. Moving on to another SBC that isn't really an SBC because it is not really a computer in a. I mean, it is a computer. I'll give it that. So this is the Vocore 2. Now the Vocore 2 is a very special kind of small, tiny, tiny little cube, but it does a lot. It's a sub 600 megahertz SoC. Now it does have, it's not ARM, it's actually running on MIPS, and MIPS is something that is used for routers, and it is in the right uh, mindset, the a router chipset and not a for mobile phone chipset that most of the ARM based SBCs have. Um, and it's running MIPS. It's a MediaTek chipset, but it has Ethernet output. It has audio output, so you can see the DACs. And the one of these chip is a DAC. So the DAC at the back for the output audio, analog audio output. Of course, Ethernet is a big plus. USB, full size USB 2.0, and a micro USB for, I think it's UART, and then your micro SD cards. So it's a very densely packed and a very very compact little development kit. So you can get the only the baseboard for a few bucks, and then you can add the other things on top, or you can buy it as a whole. I haven't done a lot of video on this. I really wanted to, but just couldn't due to reasons, and then I ended up keeping it in the shelf. You can see there's a nice little logo here that says the sock might get extremely hot, but it doesn't really get extremely hot. It gets hot to some point, so here's the little it gets hot logo. Let's take a look at a couple of Banana Pi SBCs. Now the first one is the dreaded Banana Pi M64. Now I'm sure whoever has bought this has ended up doing a major facepalm, because honestly the A64 by Allwinner is not a nice chipset. It's barely supported anyway. It has it has like issues, hardware issues with it. It's not really designed all that well, and that's why the support isn't really there. A lot of support was pushed out by the Pine 64 guys, which did a lot of work on the A64, and what the Banana Pi guys did was just take the Pine 64 stuff and make it work, and their own OS, their own Linux OS, which was I think based on Ubuntu Mate or something, doesn't work. It doesn't boot. It barely boots. I don't know how they are getting it to boot on their tests, but it doesn't boot on from an SD card at all. I don't know why. The Ethernet port, I think it's a gigabit. I'm not sure. Two USB twos, meh. And then HDMI. I think this is for the battery. It has onboard battery control or something. 2 gigs of RAM, so 2 RAM chips at the bottom, 2 at the top. Barrel power jack, at least it has a barrel power jack. That's the only plus I can think of, because the A64 is not a very well supported chipset at all, and it's really just there sitting. I think I just did a single video on this, I guess. Alright, moving on to some more positive Banana Pi things. The Banana Pi M1 Plus. Yay. Now this is, I think, the only Banana Pi I'd ever recommend buying until they come out with the 96 ports one. Then I can recommend that, of course. But yeah, so the Banana Pi M1 Plus runs on the Allwinner A20 SOC. This SOC is pretty well supported on the mainline kernel and on some other um, third party OS like Ambien that runs on mainline kernel. It has a SATA port apart from all the regular gigabit Ethernet and your two USB 2s. The SOC is so old. It came around the time where when dual core mobile SOCs were just new, so it just advertises like dual core on the print over the SOCs. It just says dual core, which seems like a hard sell now because dual core is just so old. I think it was Cortex A9. It doesn't heat up a lot. I'd say that does not heat up a lot. It's a nice little sock, and then a gig of RAM comes in. It's at Wi-Fi. Comes in a Raspberry Pi 1 form factor. Um, yeah, it's supported. It's also supported on FreeBSD, so the software support is fairly good for this board. So I wouldn't really mind that. Moving on to the last three boards that we have. The first one is the Rose Apple Pi. Now, the Rose Apple Pi would always be special for me, and the reason being that it was the first board that I received, to review, and the people who were marketing it, who were selling it, actually contacted me instead of the other way around, and they said that if they really wanted me to review it and put it up on my channel, and it was suddenly out of the blue that it happened, and it really made me believe in my channel, and then you know that's how the channel grew. So this is sort of the board that I'd say kind of no, the Raspberry Pi is the board that started it off. This is the board that gave it a big push, and then I started reviewing different development boards on the channel. Again, I got a lot of crap when I said that I like the black SBC, like I said for the Hikey, and I said for the Rock 64. It always looks good. The tracks are hard to follow. Again, I'll get a lot of crap for saying that green SBC, that black SBC looks better than green, but still, nice little board, looks good. The only thing is, again, the software support wasn't really good. It was the first board to have 2 gigs of RAM and has like very hot sock. The Actions Semi S500 is the sock on this one. HDMI port. It had some space for eMMC, but they didn't really populate it. I think they did in the other variants of this one, but not this particular one. So, okayish board, I guess, and there it is, the first board that I reviewed. Alright, moving on, BeagleBone Green Wireless. I have mixed feeling about this. BeagleBone has always been DIY favorite even before the Raspberry Pi was there, and the reason is that the SoC on this one is not really a mobile chipset. It's not made for mobile application. I mean smartphone application. It's actually made for industrial grade stuff and IoT before IoT even existed. It has a lot of GPIO, a lot of real-time controllers, um, timers, and all of that good stuff that you need to make your timing really precise. A lot of people love the general idea of BeagleBone having this particular chipset, and they have stuck with this chipset for so long, and they are still going on strong. There are still just new versions of BeagleBone. Good friend Michael Welling did the PocketBone recently with the whole BGA package that has the whole BeagleBone inside of it. I'm not really remembering the name of the vendor of that BGA package yet, but that particular BGA package has the RAM, the SOC, the RAM, and the 4 gigabytes of eMMC in a single package. So that's pretty neat. Uh, 4 USB ports instead of one, replacing the Ethernet port. Um, and then it has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and then instead of the HDMI they gave this crappy groove sensor. I never really liked the groove sensor by Seed Studio, the groove connectors. The reason being is just if you buy something with a groove connector, it just adds up to the price, and this is something that I call the groove tax. So if I'm buying something that costs rupees 100, I end up paying 300 or 400 rupees for the groove connectors. So it just makes it expensive. Now they did include tiny little antennas just to boost the signal a bit. Again, this is a BeagleBone Green wireless. No, sadly, no HDMI port because I've always wanted to see the to play along around with the GPU in this in the Beagle BeagleBone Black series, but never really got to. So I didn't really do too many projects on this one, but it's still an okay board. I'd still prefer the full-blown proper BeagleBone Black over this. Now for the last board, we have the Khadas Vim. A neat little board. Now the packaging was something that I really impressed me because no one really packages their um, SBC in a great way. The only board that beat the Khadas Vim in packaging was, I guess, the Dragon Boat 410C and the MediaTek X20. Both of them had really nice, packaging like you're opening up a new smartphone. And the Khadas one went for the Khadas Vim went for the book kind of a look. So this is the Khadas Vim. The specs are here. So it's AM Logic S509X quad core Cortex A53. I think 1.4 gigahertz per core. USB Type C with USB 2 OTG. So it's not a full USB Type C. Just the form factor is of USB Type C, but still USB 2.0 on the core. 2 gigabytes of DDR3 with 16 gig eMMC on this particular one. HDMI 2 with 4K H265, 4K H265, VPN 9, 10-bit HDR10 video processing. That is actually pretty beautiful when you look at it for the first time. The form factor is pretty slim. We'll get to it why. It has onboard Wi-Fi. I don't know about Bluetooth, but Wi-Fi is there, and it's nice. It has gigabit Ethernet or megabit. I'm not very sure, but USB 3 on one of the ports. I'm not sure again. Man, I don't remember my specs really well right now for this particular board. But look at how the USB or how the Ethernet port is placed. Um, they have actually cut the PCB in between and then placed the Ethernet port down there so that it reduces the height quite a bit. That's what a lot of people have done with the Raspberry Pi 3. I've seen a few projects that they have removed all the onboard ports and replaced them with like micro ports, micro like for USB they have micro USB, HDMI goes into micro HDMI, and then they have like desoldered all the original ports to just make it extremely slim and fit in places. Um, but yeah, this is Khadas Vim. Alright, so that's about it. All the around 2022 single board computers and dev boards in a single video. I think the video recording time was around 40 minutes. Yes, a lot of dev boards on hand, and hopefully you can see more videos from me on this channel and the 96 boards channel in the coming year. Hope you had a great 2017 and wishing you all a good 2018. See you all in the next year, and hit the like button if you liked it, hit the dislike button if you thought this was a really long video that didn't need to happen, and comment down below your thoughts on the single board computers that I have. I'm probably missing a few important ones like the Odroid C2. So thank you so much for watching once again. Happy New Year, guys. See you later.